and I finished a master's degree in 2016 in psychological research. So I've applied to grad school twice. And I'm also a first-gen graduate student. So I learned a lot of this the hard way, and I was hoping to convey some of what I learned in hopes of demystifying this process for those of you interested in graduate school. That being said, well, let's just jump into the presentation, and we'll have a few moments to interact with us throughout. So please do pay attention, because I would love to hear from you as well. We're also going to save time for Q&A at the end. So I feel like that sometimes is the most fruitful discussion anyway. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so here we are. Oops. Okay, so this is today. We're going to be talking about recommendations and admissions tests. And oh, I don't know why I had that animation. Anyway, so first I want to know about your questions. So if you could type in the chat what you're hoping to get out of today, maybe what questions you have coming in, or just subjects you want to make sure we touch on. In part because I want to know if I'm already going to talk about it, and then also so I can make sure to touch on those things as we go. Oh, also, I forgot to mention that we will be recording this because a couple people weren't able to make it. So if for any reason, you're welcome to turn off your camera if that makes you more comfortable. But we are recording for a couple people who requested that. So yeah, how to ask, that's a big one. How and when to go about asking. I also see maybe some stuff on when we should start the application process and the timeline. Great, I think we're going to cover that too. Oh, this is a good one that we cover briefly. We'll make sure we go into it. What about if you go to grad school a little later? What's the timeline there? How do you go about getting those letters? Yes, second on the rough timeline. Great questions. Okay, cool. It gives me a sense. We'll definitely cover all of that and then hopefully get to some more specific questions as we go at the end. Okay, so what's the big picture? First off, you don't have to remember everything that we're going to talk about today. It's stressful. There's a lot. The whole process was stressful for me multiple times. And I can't even articulate how stressful. So today, my hope is that you just take away some of these big picture themes. And I'm going to give you some resources at the end to help you kind of dig deeper, because there's no way you can know everything about this process. And I think most of us just kind of make it work. And you can mess up a few times in this process and you'll still be okay. I never knew that you could email professors ahead of time and ask if they're taking students or if you'd even be a good fit. Didn't do that, didn't know to do that. I had no idea. I was completely caught off guard when the first professor reached out to me and said, hey, I see your application. Can we set up a phone call? That was completely new territory. So you definitely can mess up in the process and it's okay. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, it can be costly as well. So we'll talk about that too. And I'm hoping to give you some resources that can help minimize those costs and show you just kind of the range of what's going on here. Okay, so first let's start off with letters of recommendation. And it felt really big for me asking for letters. I think that was the part that was scariest because I had to really reach out to someone else and say, here's me, here's what I want to do, and can you support me in this? The rest of it felt like something I could control, and this was the only part that felt really out of my control. And I also didn't quite know how to go about it. I was just kind of gathering little pieces from what I had heard from other students, from occasional, references by professors in class. And I will say there's no one way of doing this either. I've read, contradictory information on both sides. So again, you can mess up, you don't have to do it perfectly, and it's okay. Yes, let's see. The other thing I would challenge you to do is stop thinking about the whole process as what do I need to do it right? And how do I do it right? And think of it more as all of these things, including the letters, are just pieces of data for the admissions committee to get a sense of who you are. So think of it more from the admissions committee standpoint. What do they need to know? What do you want them to know about you? Because your letters of rec play a very specific role in that really gets at what are your strengths, what are your characters, traits. Like, it gives more of a personalized sense of who you are and what it might be like to work with you from somebody's outside perspective. And that's information that they can't necessarily glean from your CV and your personal statement. So that's kind of like, if you take nothing else out of this, that's probably the big takeaway, is like the letters of rec are not about having this like perfect example of how you are a fit for this program, but more about getting this like taste of what it would be like to work with you. Okay. So the first question, who do you ask? I think this is, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about who to ask. First off, faculty, obviously, especially if you're talking graduate school, any program that has research as a main piece, they're going to want to see PhD level faculty, preferably people who are tenure track. So the kind of titles you're going to want to look for are associate professor, assistant professor, full professor, or just professor. More and more, you're probably having classes with graduate students and lecturers, adjunct faculty. These people are okay, but their letters aren't going to hold as much weight. I know, because I teach a class and I get asked for letters all the time, and I always have to kind of let people know that that's sort of the trade-off if they get a letter from me, is I don't have a PhD, I'm not a full tenured professor, so my letter may not hold as much weight as someone else's. Okay, and then the other thing is volunteer and internship supervisors. This can be especially true if you're applying to like a clinical field, psychology, medicine. They might want to know, how do you interact with people, right? If that's a main piece of your program, they're going to want to have somebody who can speak to that. What are you like, or how, what's your sort of, how ethical are you in a workspace? And not just those pieces, but it can be a variety. Especially master's level clinical programs oftentimes require one of your letters to be from a volunteer or internship supervisor. We're going to talk about the caveats with them in a minute, because one of the main problems is they oftentimes don't know how to write the letters in the way that your faculty are going to know. Faculty are used to this system, they're familiar with it, this is not new to them. But your internship and volunteer supervisors may have never done this before. So you need to give them a lot more information and kind of hold their hand through the process to make sure you get the letter that is expected. I'm happy to talk about that more at the end too. The relationship is the key piece here. So sometimes people think, well, there's this really big name professor, kind of like famous in the academic world, in my department, and I've taken an intro class with them. They might even know my face, right? And I got an A in their class. Should I ask this person? Probably not. Actually, in that case, definitely not, right? They don't know anything about you other than you got an A and you showed up to class, right? That's about all they can say. It's far more impactful if you have a, newer faculty member, lesser known, but they, you've taken multiple classes, you came to office hours, you did really well, and they really praised you for one of your projects, something like memorable happened with this professor. That relationship's important. Even better would be you've done research with this person, or they've in some way taken on sort of a mentorship or interest in your career and your goals. And that could come out in a variety of ways. The other thing I will add here that I didn't think of initially is if you're doing research and you're working with a graduate student, that's okay. Don't pass up on that opportunity just because you're not working directly under the faculty member. I do this all the time, where I basically write the letter for people who worked under me, and then my faculty member like goes through, makes any changes he wants, and then signs it. Because ultimately, if you're working for me, you're working for him. So it's okay, like you can develop really good relationships with the doctoral students and still get a really solid letter out of that experience. That's kind of like one of those little unknown things that I think students worry about. Okay. How? This is the hard one. You can definitely do email. especially if you've been out of school for a while, this, regularly emailing with this person like once every 6 months or once a year just to say hi and here's what you're doing can really help to maintain that relationship. Office hours, you can definitely ask during office hours, especially if it's someone that you see regularly anyway. Before or after class, I say before more as like a, hey, can I talk to you after class? I wouldn't actually ask before class. They're typically prepping, they've got a lot on their mind. That's probably not the best time, but you can ask before class if they've got a few minutes at the end. And then at the end, if they say yes, you can ask then. Give plenty of notice. I think this is the part I really struggled with, is I knew who I wanted to ask, but I was so nervous to ask them that I kept pushing it off. And so then it ends up being like a month's notice, 3 weeks notice, and that's really pushing it. Your letter writers are going to appreciate it so much more if you can give them 2-3 months advance notice, even if you don't get all your materials to them right away. At least gives them a sense of like, oh, I need to put this on my calendar. Yeah, and then I think when you're debating on which way to ask them, just really ask yourself what feels right, because every different relationship might dictate a different way of contact. My master's advisor that I worked with every day, in some capacity, it felt very natural to talk to her in person. But there were other professors that we didn't really have that relationship. We had a good relationship, but it wasn't that close. That email felt so much better. Like that just felt appropriate for the relationship. Okay. All right, what to include in your letters? Well, this can vary a little bit. Some professors have like they'll send you back an email with a list of like, here's exactly what I want from you. Obviously do what they want in the order they want. Some people will want one PDF with everything in it. Some people want a binder, like physical binder that they can hold. That's the old way. I think more and more people are doing it electronically, but first time around that I applied, everybody wanted a binder. Nowadays, I think they just want a PDF. But keep that in mind. If you have a really old school professor, they may still want a binder from you. So that might be a thing. For sure, most people want to see at least like a paragraph pulled straight from the websites of the schools you're interested in. The other thing I would say, do I have it on here? Oh, no, I don't. At the very top, oh, maybe it's on the next. Yeah, maybe it's on the next one. But I always include like a summary sheet of here are all the schools I'm applying to. Here's the deadline. Here's how you submit, right? Via email, via this, like look out for that. And I always set my deadlines like a week before I actually need it. You don't have to, but if you give them enough lead time, then it's not a big deal to say like, let's say everything's due December 1st to have it due, right before Thanksgiving. And that way they get it done early. And if they miss the deadline, you have a little bit of time to email them and remind them before it's actually due. So it's kind of up to you, but I've definitely, put my mind at ease to know everything would be in early and ahead of time. Sometimes if you've been out of school for a while, you might need to remind them of your relationship in that email. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is what I'm trying to say. So in that original email or in that ask, you want to ask, like, remind them, what are your goals? Why are you going to grad school? Very briefly, just in like a sentence or two. Hey, do you remember that time we talked about my interest in marketing? And, I'm really trying to transition. I'd love to get a MBA. And so I'm applying to these schools. I really enjoyed working with you for the last couple of years in this class and that class. I, especially enjoyed that project on X, Y, and Z, and then make the ask. I'm wondering if you have the time. So I've heard different, and Adria, if you want to jump in on this, but I've heard different ways of going about it. I had one professor who was frequently asked to ask about time. Do you have time to write me a letter of recommendation? Because it gives them a really polite way of declining if they don't think they can write you a strong letter. Then they can say, oh, I honestly don't have time right now. And they don't ever have to say, I don't know you well enough. But I've also seen other places say, you should be very clear. Would you be able to write me a strong letter of recommendation? And so being very direct and be really honest, because if they say no, I don't think it would be very strong. You should take that and find out maybe they'd be willing to give you feedback about why, but also you don't want that person to write you a letter then. So you kind of want to know who not to. Don't pester them about doing it if they say no. And then give them a general timeline, because these are the things that they're going to review in making that decision. They want to know, do they have enough time? You want to kind of gently remind them that you do know me well enough. And then you also want to like give them a sense of like, who are you and where are you going? And can they speak to that at all? Okay, so that's what you ask or what you include. Here's what you include in your materials. So once they say yes, then you come back to them. And I was kind of getting ahead of myself there before. And again, you don't need to remember all of this. This is a lot to take in. And there are lots of different resources that can help kind of summarize this information for you. So, but in general, I always give a summary of the due dates. And that's kind of what I was getting at earlier. That's the first page. It used to be when you do binders, that was like the cover of the binder. And so they could literally check it off. Because I can't tell you how agonizing it is when I've written a letter just for like an internship type thing and woken up the next morning and go, did I submit that? Like, it's the scariest feeling as a letter writer to think you missed that deadline for someone. Luckily, I hadn't missed it, but I was like really scared that I had. So it's nice to have just a quick checklist. Yes, I did that school. I did that school. Program information for each school you're interested in. What are their mission statements? Do they give the criteria that they're looking for in an applicant, right? Like some schools will say like students who really do well in this program are XYZ. So give them that material because they're going to want to use those same words. So-and-so is diligent, which is a word used in the mission statement. Draft of your statement of purpose or any essays that are required. Again, it just has to be a draft. Don't let this piece hold you up from asking. And if you don't have it, you can be honest about that. I try to have a draft, or at least at the very minimum, like a bullet point of here are the things that I plan to put in my statement, because it will change. But the benefit too of having a draft done is that you can oftentimes ask for feedback as well as part of this process. Sometimes they'll give you unsolicited feedback. I remember writing a letter for someone and reading their statement, and I was like, oh, they need to put in all these other experiences that they didn't include. So I sent them an email saying like, here's the edits I would suggest. So you can oftentimes get some really good feedback. Unofficial transcripts, they don't need to be official. And I would highly recommend highlighting the classes you took with that letter writer for each individual person, just so it makes it really easy for them to jump straight to it. Then lastly, your resume, CV, or I'm going to show you later, there's a resource here at UT that they have this really nice history questionnaire that might be able to either replace or supplement. Most people will expect your CV still, so you might want to still have that, but it's a nice summary sheet. This seems like a lot of information to provide, and I want to kind of give you some context about that. So I had a professor tell me why she requires so much of this up front. And she made it very clear that when tenured professors go up for tenure, which is their only big promotion, nobody cares how many letters they wrote. It's not part of their job description. It's something they do because the academy runs on it. It's an assumed part of the job, but nobody ever gives them credit for it. They don't get a raise based on it, none of that. So as a student, you're kind of in this weird place where, yes, the professors expect to do this for you, but on the flip side, you also have to respect the fact that they get nothing out of it, like tangible. There's nothing tangible that they get other than the joy of helping you move to the next stage of your life. So you want to make this as effortless as possible. You want to make this fast and easy for them. I've had some professors come back and tell me, outline everything that you've done for me. Okay, so I quickly threw together an outline of everything I did for them to make it really easy for them to write that letter. Okay, so hopefully that gives some context about why you have to have so many things and why it should be meticulously organized to make their life easy. Hopefully it goes without saying, send a thank you. This is also your opportunity to maintain this relationship, because here's the good news. Once they've written you a letter once, Every professor I know saves that letter. They've got a file on their hard drive with student letters and they have your name in there. So if you need a letter later for a scholarship, it's not hard for them to edit that letter and it's a much faster process. So in some ways it's actually nice. Like if you're early on in your career in college and there's an internship or, you know, scholarship that you want to apply for, start asking for letters early because then they already have something and they just have to update it. And that's it's an easier ask. Once they've said yes once, they will typically always say yes after that. And also don't be afraid to just drop them a line. Professors love to hear where you're at now. It's always good to kind of keep that relationship going. But wait, there's always more, right? What are all the caveats? Gap year, somebody brought that up earlier. What if I leave school for 2, 3, 4 years? What do I do? Ask before you leave. That's the main takeaway. Let them know that you're planning to go to grad school and maybe some general areas you're considering. Here's what I'm going to go do in the meantime. And I'm just wondering if, you might be available in 2 years and be willing to write me a letter at that time. It's important to do that for 2 reasons. One, they make a mental note to remember you. And 2, it obviously plants the seed for later, but you might find out something like, oh, well, I'm planning to retire next year. So please send it to this email instead. Like I won't be checking my UT email more than likely. Or I'm going to be on sabbatical that semester. Let me know the semester ahead of time and I'll get it ready for you. Usually it doesn't mean like they'll say no, but they'll just kind of give you they're thinking about how can I make this work for you? Okay. Oh yeah, there was my gap year picture of maybe you want to go teach PE in Hawaii for 2 years. That sounds awesome. Go for it. I think that's Waikiki. I could be wrong. If anyone else is more well-traveled than I am, maybe but kind of looked like Honolulu. I don't know. What about non-academic letters? So we talked about that earlier. I think I probably already touched on that enough, but at the end, there's a guide I'm going to share with you for like instructions for a non-academic letter writer to help them kind of give you the letter that you need. But I guess the main takeaway is sometimes you have to give them a lot of detail. Like you need to really outline the letter. I've had non-academics ask me to basically write the letter and then they edit it and make it what they'll take stuff out and put more stuff in. And then there's always the optional letter. I love this when programs are like 3 letters and a 4th optional letter or 2 letters and a 3rd optional letter. That's always a hard decision. I think more often than not, it can't hurt you. Oh, Adria, please jump in.
I was just going to ask a question that came in through the chat about the thank yous. I just want, in case you hadn't seen it, the question was about how soon after, where in the process do you send the thank yous?
That's a good one. Yeah, where in the process? Right after they submit it. Most of the time, but not always, professors will send you a quick email saying, done, submitted, let me know how it goes. Or you'll see on the admissions portal that they've submitted. So once you'll get usually a notification or when you log in, you'll see it's been submitted, shoot them an email immediately. If we're back in person and you feel like doing a handwritten note, that's perfectly fine and sometimes very flattering. So that can always be nice. And then the other big thing is keep them updated on the process. So they love to hear when you get interviews, if you get interviews, they love to hear how the interviews went. Sometimes they'll help you prep for the interviews, or at least get you in touch with people who will. What else? They will, and then obviously let them know if you get in, or if you don't too. It's not, some of you are probably looking at really highly competitive programs. I've got friends in my PhD program that applied 3 years in a row before they got in. It's not uncommon. So let them know if you don't get in because they kind of want to know if you're going to ask for a letter again next year, right? So that's my tip there is more communication, the better, without being nagging or asking, without kind of like, I don't know, it is hard because it's like a fine line, but you definitely can, as soon as you can, send a thank you. As soon as you know it's been submitted. You also might need to remind them like a month ahead of time, 2 weeks ahead of time, If it's getting up to like the final days, do not be afraid to contact them. Keep it short, keep it sweet. They already know they've committed to it. Just kind of let them and ask, do they need anything from you? Is there anything you can do to help? Yeah, but it's okay to nag them. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of professors, like, those emails just get lost. So if you send 2-3 days in a row, if it's getting right up to that last deadline, it's okay. They know that they're bad at checking their email. So, and you know your professors better. Some of them are great about checking email. Others are terrible about it. Check it twice a week. And so, okay. So then, yeah, optional letters, back to this. They typically only help you unless the person really doesn't know you well, then it's probably not worth asking for that optional letter. But let's say you've already, last year you already had 3 letters writers, and this year you're applying to a program that only requires 2. If you felt like all 3 were probably really good letters, then go ahead and submit all 3. And then the other benefit of optional letters is if somebody really does forget to submit, then that optional one gets bumped in and counted as your required letter. So you don't get disqualified for that. However, it might hurt you if that person was just kind of didn't know you that well. Did I talk about big names? I don't think I did. Oh, no, I did. I talked about, the big name people. Okay. Any other questions about recommendations before we move on? Anything in the chat, Adria? I don't have it up right now.
Nothing in the chat. I just wanted to, I think you had said about, should you, oh, now I've lost my train of thought. Oh my goodness. Oh no, yes. It was about, should you ask for letters and say, do you have time to write me a letter, or can you write me a strong letter? And I'm very much in the camp of, can you write me a strong letter? I think it's also in the spirit of just learning how to advocate for yourself, and that's professional communication with a faculty member, and having that conversation. If they can't write you a strong letter, then like Cassandra said, perhaps you can get some insight that might be helpful for you down the road.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. All right.
I had a question.
Yeah, please.
So you said, well, I'm thinking of asking someone that's in my field, but he's a new teacher, but he has a PhD and years of actual doing the school psychologist, and he's a new professor. So he doesn't have tenure. Would that still be okay?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine. Yeah, it sounds like they're perfectly fine for that purpose, especially if they know you. And yeah, it's more about the relationship. And also you're kind of weighing the level of program you're applying for, right? Like if you're applying for a really prestigious scholarship, you're not going to want a master's level, assistant instructor like myself, right? But if you're just applying for like a summer internship, I might be good enough for that purpose, right? So it's kind of like you want to weigh how, but for grad school, typically you want that sort of minimum level of PhD, employed at the university in at least some sort of full-time capacity.
Okay.
That's great. Good question. Thank you, Nina. And I see something in the chat. How can we get more experience to get good recs? Yeah, that's always the great question. I just transferred to UT from community college, and with everything remote, I don't know how to get research experience or anything like that. Yeah, that is such a great question. And I'm glad you're asking it early in your career here at UT. It may not feel early, but junior year, you still have plenty of time. Not plenty, but you still have time. I didn't start getting involved in research until the summer before my senior year. And when I did, I kind of hit full steam, right? Like I joined 2 labs and eventually a 3rd over the following summer. And because of that, it made more sense for me to wait and not apply to grad school right away, right, in that situation, because they didn't know me well enough at that point. I had only been working with them for 4 months. It would have felt weird to have them write me a letter. So yeah, if you can get involved now. So first off, Eureka, if you haven't heard of it. Adria, do you mind pulling up that website and throwing it in the chat? Eureka is a great resource that basically you can search and find different research projects and different professors across campus and have a sense of what they're doing. The caveat there is some professors keep their Eureka site more updated than others, but it never hurts to reach out and email because you never quite know what's changed. So if you find a project that's really fits your interests or has skills that you really want to develop, then, it doesn't hurt to send them a quick email and just ask to do, if they're looking for research assistance. Also, depending on your major, you may have like a research experiential course that you can add. And so what happens in my department is we will get emails, my professor gets emails from students, just cold emails saying, hey, I'm interested in, I've read your lab website, I have interest in the same topic. Are you looking for any research assistance? And then as a team, we talk about it, could we use the help? And if we can, we'll typically say yes. And they get credit for doing that research for the semester. So they get course credits and we get a little bit of help. And that's one way to get in, is to just be assertive and sort of get yourself out there. Because it is hard with a university as big as UT. The other thing is if you've done really well in someone's class, I got research experience simply by going up to my stats teacher at the end of the semester and saying, do you need a research assistant? And her answer was no. I'm only doing research with Korean speaking women right now. And I was like, well, yeah, I don't speak Korean. That's not going to work. But 6 months later, she emailed me saying, are you still interested? I've got another project that you'd be great for. So yeah, I think self-advocating is really important. But then Eureka, if you haven't heard of it, is another great way. I do think that's hard because research is, yeah, you're welcome. I think research is this not always what you're interested in for grad school, but this weird sort of gateway to making those relationships with faculty. And I think, it's hard to do that in other ways. Obviously, doing really well in someone's class and making yourself known, really engage, even if it's virtual, asking questions, showing up to office hours, asking good questions like at office hours, those can be ways of developing a relationship too. Adrienne, any other tips?
Well, I was just going to jump in a little bit with the pandemic. I think getting experience can be much more challenging right now. And I know Cassandra is going to talk about our services, but I think this is a perfect example of, a great thing to do would be to schedule an appointment with one of us so that we can kind of sit and understand what you're doing, what you're interested in, what programs you might, be interested in terms of grad school, and help you brainstorm, because we have to be a little more creative right now. And hopefully the pandemic is slowing or changing and we'll be able to do things more in person. But, we could talk about micro internships or other opportunities to develop some skills that you could highlight as you're applying to grad school.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I also want to say that to the extent that professors can, they are definitely doing research regardless. So research is definitely still happening at UT. There's a lot of incentive to be doing it right now. So it might look very different and it might be harder to develop those relationships, but the opportunities do still exist. They might just feel really invisible, but they're there. They're just happening in people's bedrooms. So, okay. Let's talk about admissions tests. So the problem here is I can't go really into depth on any one of these tests. So I'm going to kind of cover it broadly and then hopefully give you the tools you need to kind of dig deep on whichever test applies to you. Okay, so the basics. You don't necessarily need a high score. I hope that's good news to you. A lot of times these tests are used as more and more. I think back, maybe, Adrienne, not to date you, but maybe back in your day, they meant more. But there's kind of a movement to not putting so much weight on these admissions tests. And that can vary field to field. I was just reading up on this in preparation, and it seems like business schools still put quite a bit of weight on some of these tests, but programs like mine have gone to a policy where it's the last thing they look at. So they look at participants, all their other things, and then they look at the GRE scores in hopes that they will not weigh so heavily on the decision. The problem is they can oftentimes decide who gets to even be seen. So what still I think is the trend is to take GPA and to take admissions tests, find the median or the midpoint in the distribution of applicants, and they just throw out everyone below that level. It sounds really unfortunate, and it is, and it depends on how popular that program is. If they don't get a lot of applicants for whatever reason, maybe it's in North Dakota and nobody wants to go live there. I'm from the Midwest, so I've got love for it, but that happens, then they might not do that. They may look at everybody. But if you're applying to Harvard's, MBA program, they don't have time to look at every application. So they basically just say anyone below a 3.0, we're not even going to consider, or 2.9 or whatever it is, or anyone below a 150 on the verbal GRE, we're not going to look at, right? So your score doesn't need to be outstanding. To keep this in perspective, and this was hard for me. I fought hard for my A's in undergrad, and it was weird for me to think that I wasn't going to ace the GRE. That took a little bit for me to wrap my head around. But think of it this way, all the all the young adults in your classes right now who are getting 99% on their tests, or, an A on their exams, those are the kids you're up against, right? Sorry, I considered myself a kid at that point. But those are the young adults you're up against, right? It's only the people who want to go to grad school. So typically they're the more high achieving students in college. So it's not uncommon for you to kind of get more at the midpoint. The tests are also designed to do that, to kind of recenter the average every so often. Anyway, at least the GRE, that's the one I'm most familiar with. But you just kind of have to get above that benchmark, and then it's usually considered holistically, right? So as long as you get above the benchmark, then you can kind of fall back more on the other elements of your application. That being said, if you have an especially low GPA, you might want to, then a high score can really offset that, right? It can really show that look, there were some challenges in undergrad, but that doesn't reflect my intellectual ability. So there's kind of that caveat too, that maybe if your GPA doesn't get above the benchmark, your GRE might save you, right, to get considered. The other thing, especially here at UT, I learned is that your GRE is heavily weighed in financial decisions. So it may not matter that much about whether or not you get offered acceptance, but if you want a really competitive financial aid offer from the university, not the department, they're going to rely more heavily on the quantitative metrics, right? So your GPA and your GRE, which was unfortunate for me because I didn't necessarily get super high scores. I got good scores, but not super high ones. So I didn't really get much financial aid from the university. I did from my department, but not the university as a whole. I know people that nearly aced the GRE and were offered really comprehensive funding packages. And it just seems really odd. I hope that dynamic shifts over time. And also tests can be costly, I'm not gonna lie. And the thing though is this is probably the area that you have the most control over in terms of finance and how much you want to invest in it. So I would say if money is a real issue, which it was for me when I took the tests, kind of take this mentality. You don't need the best score. Just put in what you can afford, do what you can. And as long as you get over that benchmark, then don't worry. And a lot of schools will actually publish the benchmarks, or they'll publish the average GRE scores from the past year. Or you can contact them and actually ask for that information and they'll share it. Okay, so preparation. So a lot of you were asking about timeline. This may vary test to test a little bit, but for the most part, this is kind of what I've seen as the recommendations. 4 to 6 months is your ideal timeline for studying, getting into a nice groove with it, taking mock tests, and then going and taking the actual test. That being said, I never studied for more than a month. So, and I know a lot of people who end up in my shoes where they just studied for a month and maybe 6 weeks. I think I did 6 weeks and then took the test. I don't know. I'd love to see studies on if studying for 4 to 6 months actually yields higher scores. I don't know. Or if crunching for a month is perfectly fine. The biggest thing I would say is schedule time for a retake. And each exam might have different rules on how often you can take it. So GRE has certain rules, they don't let you retake it within 2 weeks. And you may know it's been a good handful of years since I took it. So these rules sometimes do change. The reason I say this is because, especially with the GRE, you only have to submit the scores you want. So you don't have to show them every score. And for a lot of people, unless you study significantly more, your scores don't actually change much. But if you really, something went wrong, like, so I've got a lovely story. I know we're running out of time, but I just have to tell this one. I was so stressed about the GRE that my partner at the time was like, it was the next day. And he was like, you got to get out of the house. You were like, you're killing the vibe in here. And so he was like, let's go for a bike ride. We're going for a bike ride. My mind was so cloudy that I totally did something stupid and put myself in a situation where I got hit by a car the day before my GRE. The car was going really slow. It wasn't terrible. I may have had a slight concussion. I don't know, but I definitely like bruised my arms. I was in a sling trying to type my essays. So like, you know, just like the worst case scenario before your GRE for sure happened to me. And at the time I was uninsured, had no money to go to the doctor anyway. So I just kind of was like toughing it out. But that's a great example of a time when maybe you should retake the GRE. Like you probably do a little bit better if you're not like recovering from a physical trauma. So yeah, so allow yourself time for a retake because you just never know what's going to happen. You might get hit by a car the day before your GRE. And watch out for the subject tests. So some programs require subject tests that are outside of the regular test, and those may only be offered like every 3 months. So you have to schedule those well in advance. Be realistic as well. Like what's realistic for you? If you're the kind of person who does really well with a structured study schedule and you know, plans things out and sticks to it, 4 to 6 months might be the best plan for you, and just really cut it down to small pieces that are really easy to digest. If you're like me and you cram for exams anyway, maybe it's realistic to cram for a month, take it early, and then give yourself time to like re-gauge and maybe take it again, depending on the situation. Just so you know, I actually got good enough scores to get into my master's program after having that bike accident. So I didn't retake it because I was like, this is fine. Anyway, I did retake it before my PhD and I did improve my scores. So, okay, train the brain. So the thing that is so unfair about these tests is sometimes it comes down to like who prepares and how well they prepare and how well they do under stress, and not so much about your actual academic performance. And for the GRE specifically, it only really predicts your first year GPA in your graduate program. Beyond that, there's really no impact. It doesn't have any predictive value, according to studies. So materials, there's a lot of options here. There are books, there are courses, online courses. I like Magoosh personally. It's probably the most affordable, I think, for what you get. Kaplan is obviously like one of the leading names. There are others out there. Kaplan's really adopted a very like tiered system. Like for $60, you can get 2 practice exams kind of thing. Or you can go all the way up to like nearly $3 grand and get like individualized tutoring and all these other classes. You know, so that's why I say it's kind of unfortunate that it kind of comes down to how much money you want to invest. That being said, I don't think that it actually makes a substantial difference. Magoosh says that they guarantee you 5 points increase on the GRE. And so, you know, we'll see. But a lot of them can't really, it's hard to move your scores up more than about 5 points. Between my master's and my PhD, my quantitative score remained exactly the same, didn't increase at all. And my verbal score went up like 6 or 7 points. That could have been because I studied differently, or it could be that I just improved my verbal skills over the 2 years of my master's degree. I don't know. There are also official test websites that will typically give you some free materials. The GRE gives you, ETS is the website, and they give you 2 free mock exams, which I would highly recommend taking. That's the other thing about the prep. Leave time for mock exams, because one thing I noticed, and I told Adria the other day, is I took my first GRE and then I walked out and went, oh, that's how you take the GRE. Now I'm ready. And it's because I didn't take any mock exams. I didn't do that process. I wasn't ready for 3 hours in front of the computer. So I really lost my stamina halfway through. And it really felt like I just couldn't do it. People who take the mock exams tend to just prepare themselves for the actual process. So I would definitely do the mock exams. Oops. Here are the lovely tests. So I've been talking a lot about the graduate record exam. This can be for like almost any program can require the GRE that isn't in one of these categories. The GMAT tends to be business schools, but business schools will sometimes give you the option between GRE and the GMAT. So there's a lot of blogs out there about how to choose which one. I won't go into that. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on it either. But there is information out there, and I'm sure the business school probably has a lot more depth on that topic. The MCAT is for medical fields, and the LSAT is for law. And then I think anyone who's here at UT from that's international probably has already taken the test for English as a foreign language, but just keep in mind that'll be required as well for grad school. Okay, so these ladies look to be having a lovely time. I want to feel like they do. But I'm just curious, how are you going to take care of yourself? So think through finals week. That's like the closest example to when you go to take one of these tests. What helps you get through finals week? So if anyone just wouldn't mind throwing that in the chat, it'll give us a little bit for this last little section. And then we'll take some questions. Oops. Oh, I see nothing so far. Okay. Oh, movies. Somebody watches. Thank you, Nina. Any other things that you do that help you kind of get through that finals week? To study for my cog psych final, cognitive psych, I rewatched all the lectures at 2 times speed and got on 100 on. Okay, and it was amazing. So kind of like really prep for the test, kind of like dive in. Okay. So I'm also, I think the thing I really want to convey too is that letters, all of this, like if you're doing this lecture now and you plan on, or you're doing this workshop now, you plan on doing this process in the fall, you're already, by the time you get acceptance letters, this is going to be a year-long process for you. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. So whatever you can do to set good routines now, especially for the exams, will help you not only in grad school, but also just kind of like figure out how to take care of yourself in general, because this process will just continue to repeat throughout grad school, throughout career. So I kind of want to just spend a couple minutes talking about how to deal with the stress. I know I didn't necessarily deal with it well all the time, but there are a few things out there in the literature that are shown to be really helpful. So take charge, obviously, like we've talked about, really say what you need and be out there up front on it. And also, whatever, it's good to start these routines while you study, because that will be what helps you get through the exam in a good way. Like take that mindset into the exam. So these you've probably heard of, exercising can help with mood and just kind of regulation, eating healthy, social support. This one I think is a big one in the literature. Like the more you can have a group around you that understands what you're going through, even if that's other students or, faculty, anyone, partners that are willing to like be invested in what you're doing, that can be really helpful. The other thing I'd add to this is sleep hygiene. So, I'm sure you don't do well on finals that you just kind of like cram for and get 2 hours of sleep. Like you actually need that REM and that deep sleep to really solidify that information. But then there's a few other things that you probably don't think of as much that have been shown to be really helpful in setting these good routines, right? Put your mind, getting your mind in the right place, increasing your positive mood. Maybe some of you, it's kind of a fad right now to start a gratitude journal, but it's actually scientifically backed that just the process of thinking of things that you're grateful for can increase your mood and just kind of make you more calm. And whenever you can get into these positive emotions, your mind's actually more open, you're more creative. So if you go into the test and you're able to learn how to bring up that positivity in moments of stress, you can actually, you're more likely to see that question in a way that is less like freaking out, I don't know this, and a little more creative and engage those test taking strategies, which we didn't have time to cover here, but the Sanger Center can help you learn those test taking strategies of like, and that's what all the prep materials will do too. But you can't do that when you're in freak out mode. Mind body practices, whatever you like. If you like yoga, meditation, going for walks, like whatever you can do to kind of like going for a bike ride, other than just don't get hit. And then lastly, counseling. This is a really stressful time. And it's a stress that is beyond anything that like you've probably dealt with before. Maybe the SAT is probably the closest thing. And so by all means, like reach out for counseling. It can be career counseling if you want tips for how to handle this or how to prep for letters, or it can be CMHC or a community provider, just to kind of help give you a space to really process what you're going through, because it's a lot of change and it's sustained stress, which is the most toxic. Not to scare you away from it. There's always going to be toxic stress for anything that's, you're really striving for. It's just how do you handle it? Okay, so I know we only have a few minutes, but I want to make sure we take some questions here. So if you got to go, you got to go. I know some people probably have class, but I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I'm going to put this in the chat. This is a slide that has some resources. We've got this really lovely Office of Distinguished and Postgraduate Scholarships, which isn't exactly what you're applying for, but they have really nice recommendations for just a process of getting recommendations. They have some good advice there. And then they also have created a lot of really nice tools. Like there's a guide for faculty on how to write letters, a guide for like non-faculty, and also this like applicant history form that you can send along with your letter that gives them a really nice summary of who you are, what you want, and what you're hoping they'll basically write in their letter. I looked through UT's library, and here's the good side, the good news and the bad news. The good news is they do buy the most current test prep books. The hard part is they get checked out pretty quickly. So I could not find a way to like request the books. So you might have to reach out specifically to a librarian and say, how do I get my hands on one of these? Because most of the most recent ones that I could find were checked out until the summer. So I would say, reach out and figure that out. There are older editions, but I don't know if I'd mess with that if it's more than 5 years old. And then the Sanger Learning Center has 2 GRE prep sessions scheduled for this spring. One's on March 9th and one's on April 15th or April 5th. I'm not exactly sure what they're covering there. It's probably test taking strategies would be my guess, but that is so important. So please reach out to them if you're interested in those prep sessions. Yeah, okay, let's take some questions. We'll put the slide in the chat so you can take a copy of it if you'd like.
I'm going to also launch the poll. If you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback as you're thinking about questions you might like to have us address. Let's see. Here we go.
Okay, it looks like 4 people have responded to the poll, so thank you. If you get a chance for the other 2 of you, please, that's valuable information for us as we prepare for the last and 3rd section. Yes, thank you, Kate, as well for coming. I feel like we did answer questions along the way, so I'm you know, hopefully there aren't too many lingering. Again, you can always meet with either of us individually through the TCE undergraduate website, and you can schedule a career counseling appointment. There's a grad school planning appointment as well. So we're always happy to kind of like work through your own timeline, look at statements, talk to you about, you know, the specifics of your recommenders and like who you're thinking about asking, anything really related to grad school or career in general as well. No questions, really helpful. Awesome. That's what we love to hear. Okay, well, we've just got 2 minutes left. So if there are no other questions, I think we'll take off. Nope. Okay, cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Nina's asking if we're going to send out the recording. We had a couple people ask for it. We could definitely add you to the list. We weren't anticipating sending it to everyone, but yeah, we can do that. Okay, thank you, everyone. Take care.